Okay, I will comment the picture. Here is an illustration of the logical determinations of universality, particularity, and singularity in the case of countries, and every country is three in one might say. Every country has the Bestimmtheit, the property, the characteristic, the quality of being a country, and we will see in a few minutes what a country is, and it is particularized in a certain type of country, a certain kind of country, a particular country, and here are examples of Bestimmtheiten, determinacies of a country, namely characteristics, properties, or particularities of what a country is. I've just picked 5 different determinacy, but I could have added many more. So, for instance, if we choose the particularity of geography, namely a geographical Bestimmtheit, a determinacy of geography, a country is either a country of the northern hemisphere, or the southern hemisphere, or a western country, or an eastern country, because there are only 4 directions, one might say, in a spatial determination. So this is a way of simplifying, but then the northern hemisphere can be itself divided in south and north, because there is for instance, Italy is a southern country in relation to Europe, but it's a country of the northern hemisphere. France is a western country. Germany is an eastern country from the perspective of France, but a western country from the perspective of Poland, for instance. So it's all relative. But yeah, these are examples of geographic determinacies, Bestimmtheiten, and with each geographical Bestimmtheit comes geological, climatic, meteorological, and Bestimmtheiten, namely determinations of climate, landscapes, wildlife, etc., etc. If we take an anthropological Bestimmtheit for particular countries, the countries vary in function of the anthropological determinations of their population. Either the population is fully African, native African, or native Asian, or partly European and partly African, or fully Australoid. It does not exist any longer, but either the population is anthropologically determined, and either the proportion of depending on the origin of the people of a country can vary. There are countries like Japan where the entire population is native, although there are ethnic distinctions within the native Japanese. But a country like Japan is almost fully Mongoloid, which means that it's the anthropological term for the native Asian. And European countries in the West, they are still majoritarily, predominantly European, but with Asian elements. I could have added more. Here are just 4 examples, but there are mixed race people. Within each anthropological category, there are a continuum of genetic determinations, etc. There are non-European Caucasoids. These are Northern African people, Middle Eastern people, etc., etc. There are Southeast Asians. Here are Northeast Asians. There are Southeast Asians. There are various sub-branches of what are called Negroid or Sub-Saharan Africans. This is the anthropological term. Etc., etc. The native Amerindians, I could have added that. These are just examples. So every country is anthropologically determined in terms of quality. It doesn't mean good or bad. It means qualify the anthropological characteristics of the population, and then quantitatively determined, namely what proportions of anthropological genetic determinations. Then each country, the same goes for language. There is a predominant language in every country, the official language of the administration and the government, but then there are quantitative determination, namely there are countries where a certain proportion of the population speaks English and Spanish. Another proportion of the population speaks Spanish, etc., etc. And it goes in every country. In most African countries, there are various dialects, etc., etc. So each country has one or several official and non-official languages. Then there is the Bestimmtheit, the determinacy of politics, namely each country has a political system. Here, again, these are examples. I could have added more, but either it's a monarchy or a democracy, an authoritarian regime, a theocracy. Then there's the question of there are monarchies which are democratic, there are republics which are partly authoritarian. The Roman Republic was authoritarian was not the proper word, but it was a republic, but an aristocratic republic. So I could have added aristocracy, etc. And every authoritarian regime, although it's not officially a monarchy, because the power is concentrated into the hands of a tiny few or even one strong man, it can be seen as a mode of a monarchy. So here it's political science, but here I just simplified in 4 examples, but I could have added more. And then another Bestimmtheit, each particular country can be particularized or classified depending on economic determinations. What is the economic system? Is it socialism? Is it free market? What is the GDP of the country? Countries can be classified depending on their GDP, or depending on their unemployment rate, or depending on the level of investment in public education, etc., etc. These are examples, and then you can mix various particularities. You can imagine a northern hemisphere country predominantly populated by European Caucasoids speaking a native English language, a democracy of free market. That would be the classical United States of America. Northern, Eastern, predominantly Mongoloid, Chinese, rather authoritarian, with a mixture of socialized authoritarian capitalism and a strong GDP and a strong growth. This would be China, for instance. So you can, and there are many more particular determinacies vertically and horizontally. These are just examples. So each singular country, here I picked up countries, any kind of country, is a singular country, namely it is fully determined. It has a fully determined unemployment rate, GDP, a fully determined economic policies, which is being reflected in the various laws and institutions, etc., etc. It has a fully determined anthropological characteristic for its population. It is geographically determined, etc., etc. So the particularities of the universal determinacy of country is being fully determined, fully concrete. That's the philosophical language in each singular country. Yeah, and then one can divide even further. For instance, a country like the US, it could be divided. If you pick United States as the universal, then the particular could be the various states, and each state has its own anthropological, linguistic, political, economic determinations. In federalist countries, it can be subdivided, etc., etc. So now I will just make a brief pause and show the view of what a country is. Okay, this is the broad view, the formal view of what a country is. I will just show the broad picture. Do we see? Yeah. Okay, so in green, this is what is called nature, namely the world of time and space, matter and movement and energy, astronomy and the universe, the physical and astrophysical and cosmological universe. So these are the quantitative determination of physics, and here are the modern particular branches of the physical sciences which apply to what is called mechanic. Here is a more qualitative aspect, namely the qualitative aspect of physics, electromagnetism, optics, thermodynamics, so the understanding and the processes of magnetism, electricity, light, energy, heat and temperature, the chemical properties and reactions, etc., etc. Then the determinations of geology and the climate, etc. Here in further detail. So this is the structure of nature, the physical world, basically. And here, in the case of a country, so that would be the universal frame into which every country exists, because a country exists on planet Earth, and planet Earth is a planet within the physical universe, and it obeys the laws of quantum physics, relativity, etc., etc. But here, in the case of the more specified case of a country, it is geologically determined, and here are some scientific branches which are particularization of the planetary life. So the geology, the geological determinations of planet Earth can be divided into these various. So every country is in relation or not to the ocean, depending if it's an inland country or if it has access to the sea or to the land. It has a relationship to water, inland lakes and rivers, etc. It has mineralogic resources, a topography, a certain determinate climate, meteorological conditions, etc., etc. It has a wildlife, both botanic and zoological, etc., etc. Here are the determinations in purple of the human soul. I will not list, you can pause if you're interested. This is what, so the population of a country is sociobiologically, anthropologically, demographically, sexually differentiated. Each people has its own habits, emotions, psychiatric problems. Yeah, let's not talk about the Germans for now. Let us eschew the questions of the psychiatric problems or the psychoanalytical problems of the Germans. Let's pretend for now that they do not exist. Okay, let's pretend. Yeah, so these are the conscious relation of the mind and the consciousness to the objective world, and here it's more psychology. So every individual, but also every people, which is composed of individual. A people is a unity made up of a multiplicity of individuals, and an individual is a unity made up of a multiplicity of psychological and various determinations of the mind. So this is these are in pink and purple the determinations of the soul, and here the soul, the mind, made itself manifest through institutions, and this in blue would be the formal presentation of what a country is. I will not comment everything, but the main idea is that all the various aspects, this is a totality which exists within time and space, so all the determinations of nature, and the substratum, the substance, one might say, of a country is its people in purple and pink, and the accidents, the way the substance manifests itself, the anthropological setting, is through various institutions. So the whole of the people organizes itself into various parts, and these are the institutions and the ways, the modes, the kinds of activity and organization through which a people structures its public life and private life also. So I will just talk briefly in a few minutes. A country, when we think of a country, we think of a government which is supposed to respect and embody the principles of the constitution. At least in democratic countries, and in all countries actually, even in authoritarian ones, there is a separation of powers, but it's more prevalent in democratic countries because it is supposed to be balanced. And this is, for democratic countries, the political theater, one might say, where various political parties struggle against one another in democratic debates to acquire power. The government is responsible for the relationship with the neighbors, diplomatic, military, etc., and rights history in a way. So the Constitution tells the various rights, either individual rights or collective, and the subdivisions of the separation of power and of the Constitution and the judicial system, or the justice of a country, are, for instance, the police, judicial system, the prisons, etc., etc. Law determines, or rights determine, who owns the money supply, who is responsible for printing and issuing and collecting money. So here you would have, in rights, you would have, or the laws, you would have taxation, for instance, which would be partly finance, partly collective law. So the money, the monetary system and the banking institutions, most of the time, they are in control of the government, basically. So it's not the government who controls the bankers, it's the opposite. And here are the secret services, what we call the deep state, who are responsible for most of what happens at this level, one might say. So here, the media, they are partly independent from the government and or the banking institutions, but partly they are influenced. So depending on the country, either they are directly the voice of the government or the voice of the banking system, and they shape the sociological and the social life by spreading values, ethical codes of conduct, notions of good and evil, and so everything is interrelated, interconnected. To see the proper relationship of causality is very difficult. Is it the government which shapes the educational system? Officially, yes, but it can be reciprocally considered. Namely, this is the education of a people which shapes the government. So it's a mutual reciprocal relationship, what is called Wechselwirkung. The more educated a people is, the more it feels empowered and has feels that it has the right or even the duty to control the government, in the sense that democratic institution, representativity, no taxation without representation, etc., etc., etc. Here, of course, we have the whole realm of economics and the division of labor, which is partly a product of the anthropological characteristic of a people, but also its institutions, basically. So capitalism and the difference between socialism and capitalism, if it had to be classified in order to make this intelligible, it's partly sociological, namely a feudal economy or a hunter-gatherer economy would be it would be difficult to have a capitalist system, one might say, but it's a determination of law or property rights. So capitalism and socialism, it's partly here in the realm of property rights, but it's also a way of envisioning the world, and one can say it's even a religious determination. Economics produces culture in a broad sense, and the bedrock of the whole system is the family or the families or the group of people, the relationship between men and women, the education of the children, the marriage. These are the substratum of the whole system, and they themselves are derived from the anthropological determination of a people. So everything is interrelated. I will not make a full lecture on this, but this is what a country is in its very formal and simplified aspect, and all the parts, all the particular determinations are interconnected, interrelated. The spread of knowledge through the mediation of the internet has an impact upon the notions of ethics, culture, modes of production, which shapes the relationship between men and women, which has an impact upon rights, which brings about political change. Everything is interrelated and interconnected. And finally, here we have the realm of Objektiver Geist, and this is very important. Art, religion, and philosophy reflect, in a sense that there is a mediated relation. They express the life and the truth of a country, because the music produced in a given country at a given chronological time is the manifestation, the expression of an aspect, or even the whole, depending on the talent of the artist, on the totality of the life of a country. That's why using music to understand a people can be a great help, and it's even more true with literature and cinema, etc., etc. And and the religious views of a people determine its set of institutions, but reciprocally, it's also true. I will not make a full lecture, but I have just expressed this in a few minutes. So now I will make a pause. Okay, so now I comment further, now that probably you have seen what or how formally, of course, a country is organized. So now I will comment the German sentences. God damn it. Okay. Okay. Now that I've showed and briefly commented the structure of the institutional structure of most developed countries, especially democratic countries, but it's true of every country, I will comment the sentences in German. Okay, so das Allgemeine wird in der Besonderheit eingeschränkt. So I comment the first set of sentences. The universal is being limited or bounded, eingeschränkt, it gives itself limit in the particularity or the particularization without undergoing any change. And the same goes for the particular into the singular, which means, in ordinary language, the universal doesn't cease to be what it is in its limitations, in its particularization. Namely, a country is a country whether it's a northern, southern, western, predominantly populated by European Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Sub-Saharan Africans, or any other races or ethnicities. Whatever the language, the predominant language is, whatever it can. The changes are more important in relation to the formal structure that I've showed, depending on the political structure, but actually it's still relevant, namely that a country does not cease to be a country whatever its particularization are. And the same goes for the relationship between the particular and the singular, namely a northern country of predominantly English-speaking people, it doesn't cease to be what it is, whether you're talking about the US or England. These are singular examples of the particular northern English-speaking countries. Yeah. Okay. However, if we invert, when we go from the singular to the singular to the particular, and as well as the particular to the universal, the concrete object, for lack of a better word, loses its content. Namely, if you elevate yourself, you take England, for instance. England has a fully determined quantitative relationship of unemployment. The unemployment rate, or the GDP in England, is fully determined. So it's singularized, it's concrete. But when you elevate England to the level of the particular economic determinations of a country, namely the GDP, if you take the particularity of GDP to understand a country, the GDP of England is singular to England. Only England has the English GDP or unemployment rate or legislative laws and regulations which make it more or less free market or more or less socialistic, depending on the aspects of the economy. So only a singular country is fully determined. When you elevate yourself from singular to particular, you lose its determinations. I mean, each country which is modern in the sense of the division of labor and institutions and accountancy and statistics, etc., has a given unemployment rate, which can be falsified, but only singular countries have a fully determined unemployment rate or GDP. See, so when you elevate yourself from the singular to the particular, every singular country has a language, an official language, but when you elevate yourself to the particularity, you lose the dialect, the intonation, the tone, the vocabulary, the ways of talking, etc., etc., and you obtain just the abstract particularity. And the same goes. When you go from the particular to the universal. So yeah, so I summarize this sentence. The universal doesn't cease to be what it is when it particularizes or singularizes itself, but the reverse is not true in a sense that the singular and the particular, when they elevate themselves to the level of universality, they lose determinations in a way, because the particular is more abstract than the singular and the universal is more abstract than the particular. Yeah, okay. Second comment. The universal contains or grasps the particular and the singular under itself, like the particular grasp or contains the singular under itself. So the political or economic determinations or determinacies of a country are contained under the universality of a country. Every country has a geography, anthropology, language, politics, economics, etc., etc. And the same goes for the relationship between the particular and the singular. Das Besondere und Einzelne ist unter das Allgemeine. So the particular and the singular is under, that's a spatial representation, is under the universal, as well as the singular is under the particular. It is subsumed under, it is contained under. Subsumiert means sub means under, and sum means, I think, to be in Latin, so is under. That's why it's spatially illustrated. What is valid of the universal is valid of the particular and of the singular. And what is valid for the particular is also valid for the singular, but not in reverse. That's what I have just said earlier. Namely, every democratic country, which is a particularization of the universal determination of a country, every democratic country share properties, features, characteristics, etc. in common, and that all official democratic countries, the US, England, Germany, Finland, New Zealand, Denmark, etc., etc., they all share in common the particular aspects of what a democratic country is. But the reverse is not true, namely, Danish democracy or English democracy, it's only valid for the English. English democracy, with its history, institutions, particularization, etc., it's only valid for England and not for South Korea, for instance. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. The singular contains the particularity and the universality in itself, and the particular contains the universality in itself. So every singular country, Russia, contains political, economic, linguistic, anthropological, geographical, and others, but these are just examples. Russia contains all these determinacies within itself, and so do the Philippines and Nicaragua and Kenya. And any singular country contains within itself the moments of the particularity. Or another way of formulating this is that the particularity and the universality are inherent to the singular, and so is the universal. It is inherent in the particular. This is just basic logic. And then a little bit more complex. The universal is wider than the particular and the singular, and the particular is wider than the singular, or has a more extended sphere. However, the particular and the singular have more properties in themselves than the universal. They are more fully determined, they are more concrete, and the singular has more Eigenschaften, properties, than the particular. The singular or concrete is wealthier or richer in variety or multiplicity of determinacies than the particular and the universal. However, the universal contains more determinations or characteristics under it or under itself, more than the particular and the singular, and the relationship is true of singular, particular versus singular. So yeah, hopefully it's clear. I will summarize as briefly as I can. The universal particularizes and determines and makes itself concrete and fully determined by limiting itself in its particularities and singularization. So from top to down, it's a process of determination and becoming wealthier in determinations. Yeah, and the process from singular elevation to the universal is a process of losing one's own determinations. I will just illustrate. German democracy. Democracy in Germany exists through specific laws which enable a certain given determinate rights and duties to the German people, but these existing democratic laws, they are singular in the sense that they exist only in Germany. They have, because they are democratic laws, they contain a universality, which in this case, which a particularity, which also apply to England and the US. That's why they could be classified as democracies, or to Denmark, or whatever. But the laws which make German democracy be what it is, they are singular to Germany. They only are valid only for the German people, basically, on the German, and this goes for every other determination. And another example, Canada and Ireland, they both speak English as the predominant language, but the Canadian kind of English and the Irish kind of English language, they are distinct in various ways, in vocabulary, accent, sometimes grammar, way of talking, etc., etc. So I will not illustrate fully. I hope that the people watching this are intelligent enough to understand. It just helps classify. Okay, so now I will make a pause and I will show the brief structure of some Western countries. Okay, I just show the picture again of what a country is formally. So I just switch. Yeah. So a country exists within nature. There is a people, whether it's native or descendants of immigrants, it's not relevant in this case. It's just that each country is inhabited by a people, and it develops a certain set of institution. And now I will just briefly show again. So here are, you can pause if you are interested, the fundamental determinations of nature. And in the case of countries, we do not usually talk about countries from a quantum level, although it's partly true that a country is determined by the properties of quantum physics, and it exists on an astrophysical and astronomical plane, but we are not yet in an intergalactic confederation. Yeah, so if we really talk, it's serious, but if we talk in a more intelligible way, a country begins, strictly speaking, it begins with relativity and quantum physics, but in order to make this intelligible, a country is determined geologically. Northern, southern hemisphere, this is in geological nature, although it's partly determined by astronomy. So every country, I said this earlier, but I repeat just to make sense, it has a native wildlife, plants and animals. The population is anatomically and physiologically determined, but here it's mankind in its universality, basically. It has an ecological habitat. Here are the determinations of the people of a country. I will not comment. And the people in developed country and the historical process, they develop institutions, and these are the institutions of most developed countries in broad outline, and everything is interrelated, interconnected. And in order to think properly about one country, one has to take into account all the determinations of nature, of anthropology and Geist and psychology, and Objektiver Geist. And finally, a people expresses its life through art, religion, and philosophy. And even atheism is a particular kind of religion. It is the absence of religion. But the atheists, they still have religious values, although they are unaware of this. So yeah, this is what a country is formally. That's the formal presentation. And now I will show the intellectual and spiritual life from my point of view at this moment in time of some Western countries. Okay, so I show the broad picture. I've already made a video which probably will have been posted, and I will put the link in the description to have a full commentary of French political life. But here I will zoom in. This is an illustration of what the intellectual and spiritual life of France in the 21st century, in 2022, looks like. So it's divided left from right, and I briefly comment what I call the political media circus, namely politics and the media, and people who are invited in the media, what the ordinary people call the system, usually. I've showed briefly before what a system is. So there is a leftist opposition. Here it's valid only, so here whoever you are, if you are interested in this, you have to take into account my brief lecture on logic. So here it's a particular type, namely Western country, but it's also a socialist country inhabited historically by European Caucasoid, a country whose native language is French, etc. So there are various particularities, but here the particularity which is important is that it's a Western country. So there is the political media circus with a leftist opposition which is tolerated by the system, and here are the various categories. I will not comment because I did this in another video. And the names, they are not just these people. The people whose name appear, they just illustrate a tendency behind every person, public person on this list. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people who identify these persons as representing, embodying, reflecting their ideas, their way of thinking about the life in France or the life in the relationship to the world, basically. So these are what Hegel would call figures of consciousness. So these are not these singular individuals. It's they represent, they embody the zeitgeist, so to speak, the spirit of the times. So here is the leftist opposition, which is tolerated by the system, and here is the leftist opposition to the system, which is rejected by the system. But by system I mean political media circus, because a country in itself is a system, and you cannot go outside of the system because everything is systematically interconnected, basically. So here are the leftist opposition to the system, which is rejected by the system, and therefore they become far right because they oppose the system. Although all of them in this list, they are all leftist and even communist or socialist and radical leftist, but they are considered to be far right. And this is maybe it's a particularity of France, but I know that what called populist, they could all be called populists, but left-wing populists, and left-wing populists are accused of being far right, basically. That's a common feature of the modern Western life, and it applies not only but mostly to the Western world. And here they are on the left because I needed to put them somewhere, but they are not necessarily leftist, but they are simply, they express the scientific and intellectual life of the country, and if they are in red, it means that they are alive, basically, and in black they are dead. So these are modern scientists who express the intellectual life of a country, and here are briefly some names. It's not systematic, it's not rigorous. I have not spent a lot of time classifying these people. I took this from a book by Michael Hart, basically. an American Jewish scholar. So these are important names, but I haven't done this systematically. It can be, so eventually, if people are interested, it will be fully filled and in a more rigorous manner. But here are important names which they would be on the left. So these people, I put them on the left because there was no other place to put them. But here, most of them, not all of them, are leftist, important leftist. I mean, important. Well, can be debated, but important at least to understand the modern life. Basically, it's not a fully historical, complete. So here are names which only make sense within the French perspective. And now we'll explore the right. So here, this is the right wing. So here the distinction is political, basically. The right wing opposition to the system, which is tolerated by the system. And here are conservatives, free market economists, far-right populists, people, Islamophobes, neo-Nazis, right-wing newspapers, philosophers. So these people and the ideas that they represent, they are tolerated by the media and political system, although they are tolerated in order to be criticized and to be denounced as dangerous and populist and etc. etc. Here are people who develop ideas on the internet, so outside of the media system, and here are intelligent, moderate people, intelligent libertarians, and intelligent, well-assimilated, well-educated, successful descendants of immigrants. So westernized immigrants, I mean, I'm not sure that all of them, but most of them. And these are not just these names. They represent a proportion of descendants of immigrants which have arrived in the West over the course of the past 50 or 60 years, which have become successfully westernized, have adopted Western values. So they exist. I know in every Western country there are descendants of immigrants, whether first, second, or third generation, who have become successful and who have adopted what we call Western values and Western standards. Here are reactionary Catholics. So it's a specificity of France in the sense that there are very few reactionary Catholics in a country like England, although it may exist, or even the US. There are Catholics in the US, but mostly they are reactionary Protestants. It's a specificity of France. It's quantitatively determined. So here are examples of the revival of a reactionary Catholic uprising, one might say, reactionary pagans, in a way, so the rise of Catholicism and paganism. And it is only by revolting against the system that spirituality, because these people, they are spiritual, and these people as well, that spirit can develop, because spirit is a process of negation, in a way. Here are, I briefly comment because I already made a video, but right-wingers who want to be respectable, and here are some people who defend the interests of the white working class natives. So here is a tendency which can be found in a lot of Western countries, namely the far left. These people are socialist and communist. The far left, they become far right in a sense, because it doesn't mean that they have any racial or nationalistic view, but simply because they defend the interest of the working class independently of origin. But because they defend the interest of the working class, they are classified as far right. And those who identify themselves more or less as far right, actually they defend the interest of the people, sometimes in notions of class. And so they are kind of, I caricature, but they are kind of proto-communist. So the far left is far right, and the far right is far left, basically. And the spiritual people, they are here, basically. These people, they are too extreme. These people, they are too soft. And these people, they are intelligent, but not spiritual. So the spirit rises mostly here, basically, in religion, basically. What did you expect? Yeah, and here I chose to pick some political figures. So here it's, again, I took a dictionary. I could talk, which I did in my video that which will have been posted by the moment that this video gets public, but the purpose is to be able to give at least a few determination, to know who they are, kind of what century, what they did, to be able, I haven't put any name, which except here there are a few philosophers really, Duhem, Maine de Biran, Monod, etc., etc. I mean, I vaguely know Merleau-Ponty, I vaguely know, but I cannot talk a lot. But all the other names, I could be able to briefly talk, at least in 3 sentences, who they were, basically. The most important determination. So here are political figures, inventors, intellectuals, scientists. Here are anthropologists, economists, historians, great writers, poets. They are not necessarily on the right, but I put them here because, yeah, and spiritual people. And I could have added all the movie directors, painters, sculptors, architects, etc., etc., sportsmen, comedians, etc., etc., actors. But I haven't. But it's just to illustrate the life of a particular country. And yeah, so now I will empirically. I am a Frenchman, that's why I understand the intellectual and spiritual life of France so well, because I live empirically in France, and I understand the French language very well, and I have been in the French educational system, and outside of the system. Maybe that's what made me smart, I don't know. To be in and out at the same time, that's the key to intelligence, and yeah, whatever. So yeah, that's why on an empirical level I can only know France fully because it is my native language. But now I will show my view of the intellectual and spiritual life of other Western countries that I can know of at least partly because of the language, because I can speak English or German a little bit, but I cannot know the inner life of a country if I do not live in the country first, but in the second moment, if I do not read in the native language the life of the country. So in a sense, every individual is limited by his or her own language, basically. Yeah, that's why I will show mostly English-speaking countries and also Germany. And yeah. Okay. I don't know if people will watch my videos someday. I think they will eventually. And I don't know what they will think. Maybe a lot of negativity, but here is how I envision the intellectual and spiritual life of Anglo-Saxon countries. I mean, not England, but offshoots of Anglo-Saxon countries, namely the US, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. These are mostly American people. So I repeat, the individual names, I mean, they are important, but they embody, they represent, they reflect the opinions and views of millions, or sometimes tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or millions, or tens of millions of people. And I have not worked thoroughly on this because I could name I could make an internet research or read the newspapers and make a full detailed list of all the politicians, but these are just the important names. So in green, these are Americans. There are people whose nationality I don't know, and here, for instance, that's a New Zealander. In pink, these are Canadians. So it's a mixture of official politicians, YouTubers. In black, these are people who are dead. New Zealand, Canada, Australia. Yeah. So this is the broad view that I have. Of course, because of the reason that I've mentioned, the particularities, etc. In order to understand a country fully, I think that one has to at least live within the country or speak the native language. So I cannot know, on an empirical level, I cannot know what it's like for a native English-speaking person of the US to read or hear about these countries, and I could add the British countries, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, etc., because this is an empirical consideration, one might say. I don't know. Let us take a white American. I mean, Americans, there are Americans of all origins, but let us take a white American of Anglo-Saxon ancestry. I don't know on an empirical level what it's like for a native Anglo-Saxon American to hear or read or talk with or talk about native Anglo-Saxon descendants from these countries. I don't know how they think of one another. Then it varies depending on their culture, background, level of consciousness, etc. But this is something that, because of the limitations of my empirical self, I cannot understand. So that's why I share. I mean, that's not the sole reason, but this is one of the reasons why I share this view, because only a native person, whether it's being born on the soil, whatever the origin, or a native speaker of the language, whatever. And the same question could be asked: what does a native Englishman, whether a native anthropological Englishman or a native speaker of the English language in England, maybe even if he's Pakistani or Nigerian or Polish or whatever, how do they envision the United States of America and these countries? What is their relationship to them? I cannot know, because precisely I am not a native speaker of the English language. But here is my broad view. So here are some American newspapers. Here I pick the names on the internet. I read the New York Times sometimes, almost every day actually, but I cannot know. Only a native person of America can give determinations about these newspapers. What kind of political stance do they defend? Here are philosophers that I broadly know about. So I put only names of person how should I explain it? I have only listed names of people that I can briefly at least talk about, sometimes in just a couple of sentences, but I know broadly. Either I possess their books, or I know broadly Michael Sandel. I knew he made philosophical lectures on the internet, very famous, about ethics, Kantian ethics, utilitarian ethics, etc. Glenn Alexander Maggie is a Hegelian scholar. So I know about these physicists because they are the receptacles of cosmic consciousness, in a way. These are some of the most, I mean, they are not necessarily the best or the most well-known, but they are, at least they have gone public. Namely, these are theoretical physicists with PhD and a broad knowledge of cosmology who share their knowledge on the internet. So the United States of America has, I think she's not a physicist, she's just a journalist, I don't know, but Hagelin, Tyson, DeGrasse, Mr. Krauss, they contain in their mind some of the most developed knowledge about current modern theoretical physics. And here are historical names: Mr. Feynman, a great scientist of the 20th century, etc. Biologist, she's a native Indian biologist. Here are some anthropologists. I think they are partly of Jewish origin or American. Here are famous psychologists. William James, Pierce, Watson is behaviorism. Here, of course, everyone loves the humor of these people. Woody Allen, Mel Brooks, Chomsky, Pinker. So these are people, I put them in psychology because they are comedians or great humorists, very funny people. And she's a YouTube channel about psychology. Steven Pinker and Noam Chomsky, they are teachers and PhDs in linguistic studies. Political scientist, I think he's a leftist who wrote a book about the rise of the radical right. He made a famous study about the negative effects of multiculturalism. So they are leftists. He criticized the American educational system, whose showed that the purpose was to dumb down the population. They are experts in psychological manipulation of the populace, the people, the mob, basically. Here are New Age spiritual leaders who speak English. Modern theologians. These are pagan channels, people who are spiritual. In yellow, these are really spiritual people. I know that spirit lives in these people, but they are spiritual too. The Greenwich, I'm not sure that they are American, but they are native English speaking. So that's one of the examples. If I do not focus thoroughly, I cannot distinguish a native English speaking person from an American. Although the native English speakers, they have an accent which can be recognized, but I think these women are American. So these are spiritual people. Mrs. Ravenswood, Scarlett, if you watch this somehow, you are very spiritual. A writer about paganism, Vincent Petici, an Italian American who talks about tarot. People who have cosmic consciousness. These are YouTube channels. Yeah, that's Matthew Siegel, a PhD in philosophy. A Canadian cosmic conscious writer. Books written, yeah. These are not people, but these are YouTube channels. These are modern American writers. This is the favorite, or this was the favorite writer from Stella. I know this. So she wrote about vampires. Great American writers that I broadly know about. Yeah. I hope that the average American knows about these writers, at least some of them, because it's sometimes said that white Americans have no culture. The entire purpose, almost, I mean not, but one of the main purpose of cultural Hegelianism as an ideology, as a religion, was to show that white American modern pop culture, not only white American, but mostly American and mostly white pop culture, pop music, spreads divine truths, basically. So if Lady Gaga and Eminem and Billie Eilish, if it's not culture, I don't know what culture is. But here is what educated people would consider high culture, at least some of them. And I hope that the average American knows that white Americans have a culture. Whatever. Here, of course, I have not made a thorough list. I just made this in 2 minutes, but I will make a joke that I already made in a video that I did not post. But my videos haven't had a lot of success. But I thought here I'm in a mood to make a joke. Maybe people don't care about German metaphysics, the categories, spirit, the divine, Hegel and Nietzsche and Kant. They don't care. But if I start talking about basketball, and if I say that, in my view, from an empirical French perspective, LeBron is higher than Jordan, maybe this will create such a tremendous outburst of intellectual conflict. What? LeBron James above Jordan? Are you kidding me? I mean, okay, you may have some distorted views about sociobiology or politics. We can tolerate that, but seriously, you put LeBron ahead of Jordan, we're gonna have a serious problem. We're gonna have a serious problem with you. Well, if the Americans can somehow wake up, because I mess with their categorization of basketball players. If I have to do that in order to promote the word of God, it could be worse. It could be worse. No, but actually I don't know. I put Jordan, I put LeBron higher. But if you want Jordan, I don't really. Yeah, let us the American people. If they somehow, I don't know. Let us them decide who is the greatest. Yeah, whatever. Here are some movie. Of course, I could have listed many more, but I just did this famous American or Italian American movie directors. So yeah, that's the leftist view. Here are the American government. If I wanted to make a dubious joke, I would say that these people make movies about the mob, and these people... no, that's a joke. I will not... yeah. So here are politicians, dead political figures. I mean, political, they did not have actual political power, but they were politically influential. I could have named many more. Washington, I think he's on the right. Washington, Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, etc., etc. But Theodore Roosevelt, etc. But Truman, Eisenhower, etc. But I just put some of the most important. So here are economists. So here we have Marxist, communist, anarchist economists or left-wing economists. There's also of course, Krugman and Stiglitz who write in the common American newspaper. I think I read Paul Krugman some of his analyses. So these are some sort of Keynesians. Mrs. Yellen, who was in charge of the Fed, dead anarchist, neo-Marxist thinkers. Thinkers who wrote about the question of money in the banking system, and these are mostly Marxists, international Marxists, Mr. Jameson, Mike Davis, Michael Parenti, David Harvey, who wrote interesting analysis about modern capitalism. So I will talk then about the libertarians, but on the left there are great Marxist thinkers. They have a global, in a good sense. I'm not sure, I don't know enough about them to know whether or not they have read Hegel, but they have a rigorous way of thinking. So yeah. Entrepreneurs, so they are on the left, but they could be on the right. I just had to place them somewhere, but of course Mrs. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mr. Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, great American inventors, American anti-racist thinkers, or ideologues. So yeah, there was white people, the white ethnomasochism and the white willingness to defend non-whites. It's not a modern phenomenon. It already existed in the 19th century, but I think Americans know that. There are, of course, I guess, black nationalists or Hispanic nationalists or maybe Asian American nationalists, but I don't know their names. Of course, there was Malcolm X and Dubois, etc., who were defending and advocating the cause of blacks, mostly in America, but yeah, some LGBTQ or feminist writers, or she's a YouTuber, I think she's American, Mrs. Wolf, who wrote great books, Mrs. Butler, ecologists, yeah, and Kaczynski, the Polish American terrorist. And now on the right, you have right-wing media, Mr. Carlson, hard Republicans. The Republicans, they would be here. They are kind of leftist, and there are the hard stance Republicans, Mrs. Coulter, Mr. Buchanan, Trump and Bannon. So the right wing, the right wing of the Republican Party is on the right, and the central, the center and the left wing of the Republican Party, they are on the left, basically. They are in league with the Democrats. Yeah, I think that Americans know that. So here are the populists in a way. That's why I put. I'm not sure, because Reagan. I'm not. It depends on the Bestimmtheit. Is Reagan is he a right winger or is he a leftist? Economically, he's a right winger, but on all other topics, he may be considered a left wing political figure because he only cared about economics, basically. If I wanted to make a dubious joke about all Americans, all white Americans, all they care about is economics. So he's just a typical American. But these people, they didn't just care about the money. They were in for something greater, maybe. Here are some alt-right figures. I'm not sure that he's Canadian. Conservatives. So I could have put Mr. Peterson here with the hard stance Republicans, although I perfectly know that he's not a Republican because he's not American, but that's the distinction between particular and universal, in a sense that if Mr. Peterson was American, he would be a Republican in a way. But here I put him in conservative, so here are traditional American women who have traditional views on gender roles. Here are Republicans, so here are respectable libertarians. So here it's interesting because I don't know how Ron Paul is perceived for the average American. I can only give my perspective. For me, Ron Paul would be some sort of a moderate, common sense libertarian. But I don't know how. I mean, I know that there have been books written, probably by economists who accuse him of being a Nazi, which is completely ludicrous, but it's probably Hegelian. Charles Murray, Jeff Dees, these are the respectable figures of the libertarian movement. Here it's more radical, Di Lorenzo and Rockwell, and here they are harshly critical of the system. So here are really hardcore libertarians. Here are dead libertarian economists. Hazlitt, yeah. Here are people who wrote books about cultural Marxism. Here are non-racist anti-Semites. So there are Jewish anti-Semites, like there are white ethnomasochists and Jewish anti-Semites, so they complement one another. Here are figures of the alt-right, YouTubers and writers. I classified them in the alt-right. It's alt-right, it's not a strictly speaking official movement. Alt-right means an alternative right. So in a sense, Coulter and Buchanan and even Ron Paul, if you say that the right is the mainstream political Republicans within the political system, everyone which is distinguished from mainstream Republicans can be considered to be an alternative political view of the right, which is alt-right. So if you define alt-right by saying right-wingers who are not within the political system or who are critical of the political system from a right-wing perspective, then Donald Trump is alt-right, Steve Bannon is alt-right, Coulter and Buchanan, etc., etc. But then, of course, there's the alt-right as a fossilized movement, and these are the official representatives, or were the official representative. And here you have from respectable alt-right views to borderline white nationalist. Yeah, you have MGTOWs. Yeah, Ted Bundy was some sort of a radical MGTOW. In a way, but that's it exists within the mainstream of American political life. It's part of the history of America in a way. So yeah, there are the preppers, and here you have the sociobiologists. So I know that in some political circles, some neo-Nazis or white nationalists accuse people of Jewish origin of falsifying the data, but here are very honest people of Jewish origin who have wrote great books about feminism, about anthropology, about the decline of intelligence. So they cannot, their intellectual integrity and courage cannot be doubted. Political scientists, here I'm not sure that he's on the right, but he talks about demographics, so he's not on the left, I guess. Here are some white nationalists. So here are the respectable people who would like to be decent men in an indecent time. Jared Taylor, Brimlow. This is American Renaissance. Here are Jewish white nationalists. So there are white Jewish nationalists in politics, and there are Jewish white nationalists. So the Jews and whites in America, but in a lot of Western countries, they are kind of schizophrenic, because there are Jews who hate their own people. There are white, I mean, it's not just this person, but they are, the entire system is filled with white people who hate themselves, in case people hadn't noticed. In order to be within the system, you have to be a white person, a white liberal who hates himself and his own people, basically. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the system. So there are many whites who hate themselves, but the Jews, whether they are Americans or any nationality, they are self-hating Jews, which is problematic. Yeah. So here are so here these people they try to be respectable, and these people they are on the fringes and they are not respectable. They are open neo-Nazis basically, and they are inspiration for American neo-Nazism. Here are people who talk about the deep state. So here the classification is not strictly rigorous in the sense that these people, they are not in league with the white nationalists or with libertarians. Sometimes they can be, I don't know their political affiliations, but they simply talk about the deep state. So they talk about the people who control these people, basically. Yeah. There are right-wing pagans, so there are kind of left-wing pagans. People in yellow, these are people in whom he's an Afro-American, he's a philosophical scholar, people in whom spirit is present, I mean spiritual people. So here you have some sort of a left-wing pagan, and here there are right-wing pagan in the US, Hyperborean Reflections, Easter Tidings, Pagan Revival, Mr. Flowers and Macnallen, and here traditionalists, Philosophy Cat, Apollonian Germ, Stelbel, and here an American traditionalist. So this is how, from my perspective, I envision the American political life. And I don't know if people will watch my videos. I think that at some moment they will eventually, but I don't know what, depending on first, the categorization, it's not very systematic, it's not very rigorous, but this is how I envision American intellectual and spiritual life, knowing that I cannot, like I said earlier, if you watched the video up until now, I can only fully understand a country in which I have grown up and whose language, whose native language I speak, and whose institutions I have encountered, basically. That's why this is my view. It may be distorted, or it may bring clarity or distortion, and depending on where you fit. But for instance, here I put physicists, but I don't know what their political affiliations are. Maybe they are Democrat, but maybe they are Republican. So you can be a philosopher. Here probably Mr. Maggie, if he's interested in politics, he would probably be on the right. So it's not very rigorous, but it's just to illustrate. Scientists are supposed to be beyond left and right, because science is supposed to unite. To transcend the particulars and through the level of universality. But this is my view of American life, basically. And the people in yellow, these are people who, on the left, they understand spirit, and on the right, they understand spirit, but also politics, basically. So they understand absolute and objective spirit, and here they understand subjective and absolute spirit. So these people, I'm not accusing them of being dumb, because they are not, but I'm not sure that they have a full consciousness of what I call objective spirit. You can go back further in the video with the view of what objective spirit is. They have a great knowledge of their subjective psyche and absolute spirit. On this side, they have a more thorough knowledge of Objektiver Geist, namely the realm of institutions. So yeah, this is my current view of American life, basically. And I don't know how a Canadian, a white South African, Australians, New Zealanders, or any native English-speaking person, or any people who speaks English, whether or not they are native, whether or not they are European Caucasoid or of African origin, or Native Americans, of Amerindians or whatever. I don't know how they envision this, but this is the view that I have, and I know that the people who are spiritual, namely people whose the Spirit of God lives in them, partly, or maybe completely, I don't know. But these people, I know that they broadly, partly at least, they probably understand the process as I understand this, I guess. So yeah, okay, and yeah, this is what I could say. This is my view, my current view of America, and okay, so if the names are on this list, it's because I could be potentially capable of giving a few determination to talk about either individually or for instance, these inventors or these. I mean, there are some writers that I don't really know, but I could speak about these people broadly to situate them chronologically, give determinacies or determinations of who or what they are, what they have said or done, etc., etc. So, yeah, this is the view of America, but also of offshoots of historical offshoots of Anglo-Saxon countries, basically. Yeah, and this is not only the. I mean, hopefully this is clear, but this is not only the life of the U.S. This is the life of universal spirit, in a sense that this is the particularization in America, but the spirit which lives in these people, the scientific knowledge which lives in these people, the spirit which lives in these people, the knowledge which is being produced by these people in the realm of economics, here in the realm of sociobiology, etc., it's universal. The Democrat-Republican divide is particular to American life, but there are political divides in every country. Hopefully, this is clear. So yeah, this is the view that I have as of now of America. Yeah. So now I will make a pause and switch to other countries. Okay, this is the view of England. It's way more poor in terms of political, economic content, because I am not well aware of the current political life of England, but empirically I live on a European continent, and I identify as many things, but I partly identify as a European, and I am a lot more knowledgeable about the dead thinkers and writers and artists and creators and great men and women of the past in England than in the US. I mean, I know broadly about these people, etc., but I am more familiar with the European, in a sense of continental. I mean, England precisely is not continental Europe, but it's closer geographically than the US. So I am much more familiar with these people, of course. And here are Scots, yeah, the same thing. People in yellow, these are people in whom spirit lives. These are spiritual people. If Mrs. Emma Thorne watches this someday, you are spiritual. That's very Hegelian. I don't know if you will watch this, but if you do, the fact that you're an atheist is precisely what makes you spiritual. Maybe you will understand this because you seem to be very intelligent. Yeah. You are a cultural Hegelian, although you don't know this yet. So I don't know if you will watch this somehow, but you are typically culturally Hegelian. So you are typically Hegelian. I don't know if it's a good news, but yeah. So here are an Irishman. Keith Woods. Hopefully you will watch this video. At some moment, I don't know, but yeah. And here are Irishmen, Scotsmen in the realm of literature, Irishmen in the realm of philosophy, and Scotsmen. So yeah, so a brief comment. So I'm much more familiar with England, and I could have added Wales, but yeah. So of course the typical English newspapers, they are all on the left, I guess. Well, politicians, they are all on the left. scholar who wrote about National Socialism, a left-wing conservative. So if you have watched my video about French, here's a typical example of a leftist who is universalist in the sense that he cares about the middle class, whatever the origin, but because the system is ever more radicalized towards the left, being a conservative leftist makes you a right-winger in a sense. So he's a non-racist, non-nationalist, classical, typical leftist, but because the system is ever more left-wing, just being a typical leftist, a classical leftist, makes you a right-winger in a sense. So I could have classified him on the right. Sargon, I'm not sure that he's English, but I think. Anti-racist thinkers. So the anti-racist ideology is very developed in the US and in England. So it's a typical feature of Anglo-Saxon country. Although these people, they are not anthropologically Anglo-Saxon, but they live in an Anglo-Saxon culture. So the anti-racist ideology, some of the most prominent members of this ideology are found in England and America, and it pervades the entire Western world. A transhumanist thinker, Mr. Sheldrake and David Icke. Gerald Gardner was a pagan thinker, tried to revive paganism. Feminist, well, this is Mrs. Pankhurst. I could have added Emily Dickinson, Virginia Woolf, Mary Shelley. They are not strictly speaking open feminists as we understand this, but they are important female writers. So where's my list of English writers? I did not include, I mean, there's J.K. Rowling, but I could have included Dickinson, Virginia Woolf, Shelley, of course. Yeah, kind of misogynistic a little bit. So I'm gonna annoy I'm gonna annoy the Americans with Jordan and LeBron James, and I'm gonna annoy the English with the absence of some great female writers. Yeah, they've had some great women, the English. I mean, great. It can be dubious, but Margaret Thatcher. There's a lot to say about Mrs. Thatcher, but she was a great woman. Great in a sense that she had strong character. I mean, you can debate her policies, but she had character. Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria also, and the female writers I've just mentioned, they had character. It cannot be denied. Yeah. So now there are some sociobiologists. So sociobiology is alive in the US and Canada and England predominantly. The English and the American, so the Anglo-Saxon culture has preserved sociobiological knowledge, which enables to understand human beings, basically, which enables to understand God eventually. So yeah. And the same question can be reversed. I don't know what a typical English person, let us say an anthropological Englishman, thinks about the US or Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and I cannot understand what a typical, let us say, anthropologically Anglo-Saxon, but it can be applied to all. There are the anthropological Anglo-Saxon, there are the native English-speaking persons of any country. There are sub-Saharan African countries where English is the native language. But here, let us talk about the descendants of Anglo-Saxon colonists. I don't know what they think about England. Educated people, do they read the English newspaper? Are they aware of the intellectual and spiritual life of England? Do they know these people, at least broadly? I don't know. I don't know what people know, actually. That's why I share my knowledge, because I realized that I've already said this, but I believed myself to be an idiot for a very long time. But actually, I'm starting to think that actually I know maybe more than most intellectual people, so to speak. Whatever. So here's the same, all right-wingers, they are all on the left, and the people on the right, they are populists, basically. So here, conservative Mr. Douglas Murray, Joseph Watson, Mrs. Pettibone. Here are nationalists, Tommy Robinson, Mark Collett, Laura Towler, Paul Weston, millennial woes. He would be classified alt-right, for lack of a better categorization. He would be a traditionalist. So I cannot understand, from an empirical standpoint, what the modern Irish people think of the modern Scots, of the modern Northern Irish people, of the modern English. I cannot know what they think about one another. But if you have watched somehow my video about the French political life, I'm willing to bet that there are nationalist circles in Scotland who try to revive the old struggles against the English. I am sure that there are probably English nationalists in the fringes of this movement who think, oh, we have nothing better to do than to antagonize the Scots or the Welsh or the Irish. I can only imagine, but whatever. Here's maybe the most spiritual person in England, the most spiritual person in Ireland. Yeah. And here are English philosophers. So they are English, I think, Scottish, Irish. So I know broadly about all of these people. Great English figures, political figures. I mean, great in the sense that they've been influential. I just took this from the book by where is he? Michael Hart, The 100. But I'm sure that who are the most important English figures? William the Conqueror, Queen Elizabeth, Cromwell, Churchill. Where is Churchill? Where is Churchill? If I forgot Churchill, damn. Without Churchill, England would belong to Germany, basically. And I know that there are some people who say, thank God, God invented Winston Churchill, and some who say, maybe if he had forgotten Churchill, things would have been different. So yeah, of course there is Churchill here. Okay, but then I don't know. Disraeli, of course, in the 19th century, and all those who defeated the French in the 7 Years' War, or who defeated Napoleon, or they keep defeating the French, the English, but I don't really care because I identify as a German. Yeah, so here are some great writers, of course, Robinson Crusoe, What Mind Burden, British imperialism, basically, Orwell, basically, Harry Potter, of course, and here are great, truly great, Milton, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron. The English, they produce great literature, great poetry, and great science, which the English, they are, in terms of artistic, scientific, cultural achievements, they are one of the greatest, if maybe one of the 2 or 3 greatest peoples in the entire history of mankind. If you say that the US, basically, it's just and all these countries is just a byproduct of England, which it's partly true. I mean, I'm speaking about institutional countries. I'm well aware that there were native peoples inhabiting these countries, but I'm talking about the institutions of these countries and the modern cultural life. Then all these countries, they are just offshoots, mostly of England and Scotland, and partly Ireland, but also Northern Europe, but mostly England. So the English, one might say, they may be the greatest people ever, the greatest earthly people. Then there's the people of the highest metaphysical spheres, and this belongs to Germany. But in terms of achievements, it cannot be denied that the English, they have produced some of the greatest physicist, the greatest biologist, some of the greatest poets. He was not English, but some of the greatest economists, some of the most important philosophers, most influential philosophers. Although strictly speaking, this is not really philosophy; it's more anti-philosophy, but it's still in opposition to philosophy. Some of the greatest writers, yeah. So England, whatever one thinks about England. England has been and still is one of the greatest in terms of art. Then there is a lot to say about imperialism, slavery, colonialism, anti-German policies, gastronomy. There's a lot to say about England, but in terms of artistic, creative achievements, the English might be the greatest people on earth, maybe, with the Germans, and if you by England you mean Scotland and America, etc., then the English are probably the greatest people. Yeah, this cannot be denied. Of course, I could have I did this very briefly, but I could have added modern figures like football managers like Sir Alex Ferguson, who is Scot, but who would be classified as Scot, Sir Alex, and the great football managers, the great football players, the great musicians, the great whatever. I just put political figures, but yeah. Okay, so that's my view of modern England. As you can see, it's very shallow in a sense, because I cannot spend my days reading about English news, English intellectual life. But if you put the categories of the American life and the categories of the French life, there are no reactionary Catholics in England, I don't think so, or not many. But the broad categories here, England and America differ, but England and France are similar in the sense that there has been an important proportion of Muslim immigrants. Most of them are ordinary citizens. Some of them have become really successful westernized people, and if it is the case, most of the time they have abandoned or given up Islam. Some of them have become radicalized, and some of them, these are quantitative proportions, some of them are desocialized and bring conflict and chaos. For instance, Paul Embry, he would be a reactionary socialist or a conservative. So only a native English person can know where to classify if these categories are relevant. They are partly relevant, but because the history of France and the history of England differ so much, but also they are tied. That's logic, basically. But for instance, I'm sure that in England there are those who say on the right, or even in the center, the hero of the Second World War was Churchill. There are some who believe probably that it was Oswald Mosley, and in the fringes of the far right there are those who believe, okay, Hitler was the good guy. I'm sure that this is how it works in England as well. Yeah. So yeah, I cannot, as of now, I cannot develop more about my current view of English, modern, and historical life, basically. But yeah, that's what I could say about England. Yeah. Okay, so here my view, my current view of the Jewish people, and there are divides, whatever anti-Semites say, there are divides within the Jewish people who self-identify as having a Jewish background or Jewish ethnicity or a Jewish religion. So here it's difficult because there are atheistic Jews, there are cultural Jews, religious Jews, anthropological Jews. It's very difficult, but this is my current view. In the middle, the Jewish Superman, Übermenschen, of course, Jesus, Spinoza, Otto Weiniger, Murray Rothbard, Eric Zemmour, who is a French citizen of Jewish origin, and Jewish Wonder Women, Ayn Rand and Simone Weil, the philosopher, the French philosopher, not the French contraceptive pill proponent. That's contraceptive pill, that's philosophy. So this is my view of the Jews, my current view of the Jews. And on the right, let's begin with the right. I'm not sure that he's Jewish, actually. I don't know. But he wrote great books about sociobiology. These are courageous people. He's an Israeli, he's an American, who defend sociobiological views. And these are dead people of Jewish origin who have written a great book about intelligence and the decline of intelligence in America. And these are race realist or intelligence realist people. That's why the anti-Semite who claim that the Jews have been trying to falsify the data, there are some people who happen to be Jews who have made some dubious scholarly works about certain topics, but it's also true of whites. But it's true that there are a proportion of people who identify as Jew who have been famous for falsifying the data, but there are I don't know if the quantitative balance is the quantitative numbers are balanced, but the intellectual faculties are balanced in the sense that there are a considerable amount of Jews who have written great books about race realism or intelligence or politically incorrect topics. So here in the alt-right, there are people of Jewish background. Here are enlightened Jews. Namely, they are proponents of the values of the Enlightenment, namely 18th century France and Scotland mostly. They are liberals in the classical good sense. At least that's what I think about. Namely, tolerance, spread of ID, dialogue, culture, emancipation from religion in the good sense, not in the negative sense. Because they are the nihilistic atheists. I don't know what their religious views are, but they are proponents of the classical Enlightenment values, that progress, intellectual development, progress, the spreading of knowledge, etc., etc. Socialist Keynesian thinkers, and here are libertarians, Murray Rothbard, Mises, Rand, Schumpeter. He's not strictly speaking a libertarian, but great right-wing economic Jews, and here are great. Well, their ideas have had some detrimental effects sometimes, but intellectually they are smart. It cannot be denied. Sometimes it's confusing, but these are great anarcho-communists, either anarchist or communist Jewish thinkers. Here are Jewish philosophers. Some cultural Marxists, Jewish humor. I put this on the right. They could have been on the left, but he was genuinely intelligent. They are genuinely comical in some of their best moments. They are genuinely funny, and there is typical British humor. I haven't put any typically British comedy, but Jewish humor is very peculiar. And the Jews, well, a lot of people have problems with the Jews, but it cannot be denied that in their best moments, they are genuinely funny. They have a great sense of humor. Somehow, at some moment, the Jews, at least, I don't know, the Jews will know about the Jewish Messiah. When they learn the truth about the Jewish Messiah, hopefully they will laugh, because in a good sense, because sometimes it can be genuinely funny. But if I had to be serious and honest, and I will eventually, these people have had genuine admiration. At some moment, I've had genuine admiration for these people, and for me, they really are Jewish Übermenschen and Jewish Wonder Women. Naomi Wolf, she's kind of a leftist, but she wrote about not race realism, but about sociobiology in an honest and modern and scientific way. So she's a great writer. I read only one of her books, but she's a great writer. Here are pro-white Jews, so Jewish white nationalists in a way. I mean, they are not white nationalists because they cannot openly, because they do not fully identify as white, and a white nationalist maybe would reject them. But they are as pro-white as you can get, knowing that you are not anthropologically fully white. The same goes with Zemmour. That's why white anti-Semites who accuse the Jews of manipulating. I'm not denying that some Jews have been manipulating, let's be honest, but some whites as well. But you cannot accuse a non-white person of not being the perfect white nationalist, because if you are not perfectly white, whatever it means, you cannot be a white nationalist. So it's contradictory in a way. But maybe, precisely in a Hegelian sense, maybe the perfect white nationalist is not white, precisely. That's why he can be perfect, because he contains opposition within himself. So here are the pro-white Jews, and here are some ethno-masochistic Jews. So there are here, I mean, these people are not anthropologically white, but here are all the anti-racist British people. So most of them are, the vast majority of them are white. So there is white ethno-masochism here and there. And the opposite is true in the Jewish community, whether or not they identify as a community. There are the ethno-masochistic Jews, people who feel better when they can attack and criticize their own ethnic group. So the Jews and white people, they share in common, which is a feature which is not shared to such an extent, which are quantitative determination of quantum, intensity extension, who share such the determination of negating their own people in one way or another, of criticizing their own people. I mean, there is self-criticism in every ethnic group. There are self-hating blacks. I know that, what they call the bounty, namely they are black on the outside but they are white inside, or the Uncle Tom as they call this. Namely what black nationalists consider to be black traitors, namely Afro-Americans who adopt what is considered to be white values, but that's a mistake. These are universal values, namely black libertarians. I know that there are a proportion of black libertarians. They might be considered as traitors by black nationalists. But here, the smart people, the smart Afro-Americans in the struggle between black nationalists and Afro-American libertarians, intelligence is on the side of libertarians, because it's better to live in a society run by Afro-American libertarians than in a society run by Afro-American nationalists, probably, in terms of economic standards. Then there are other questions like culture, a sense of belonging, etc. But from a strictly economic standpoint, intelligence would be on the side of the Afro-American libertarians, but whatever. So yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, so the tendency of negating one's own ethnic group, it's of course the most developed among whites, predominantly Nordic Western whites, but it's also very prominent among the Jewish people. And there have been he was an anti-Semite. He is partly anti-Semitic in a way. I mean, he's not anti-Semitic, but he's accused by French Jews of being anti-Semitic, and by French whites as well. So whites and Jews in France accuse Zemmour, who is Jewish anthropologically, of being anti-Semitic. That's not the reason. And Jesus was anti-Semitic. Spinoza was attacked by his Jewish community. Well, my intention was not to put Jewish anti-Semites in the middle. But it happens that some of them have been attacked by the most fanatical members of their communities, whether the hardcore nationalists, I mean, not these people, but hardcore Jewish nationalists. But yeah, there are, I'm not sure that in the Afro-American, among Afro-Americans or Africans as at large, or Mongoloids, namely Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, I'm not sure that one finds such a quantitative proportion of ethno-masochistic people as can be found within the Jewish or white community. I'm not sure. So that's why the Jews and whites, they share in common this ethno-masochistic tendency, basically. So here are white abolitionists. So these people, they kind of complement one another. So here are people, Jews, who talk about sexuality, Freud, Judith Butler, etc. And here are the Jewish abolitionists, one might say, who want to abolish the white race. They are opposed to the pro-white Jews and the ethno-masochistic Jews who want to abolish the Jewish people, basically. So, of course, Mrs. Barbara Specter, Noel Ignatieff, and Mr. Kalergi, some Israeli nationalists, experts in psychological manipulations, but there are whites who are experts as well. Gustave Le Bon and Goebbels, they were pretty good at manipulating and deceiving the masses as well. Anti-technology Jew, who was a student of Heidegger. I could have added, what's her name? Hannah Arendt. Okay, Hannah Arendt. And where is Popper? Ah, he's here. Karl Popper. Yeah, Hannah Arendt would be a philosopher, basically. And spiritual Jews, of course, Saint Paul, Moses, Gershom Scholem, and Simone Weil, who is here. Yeah. And globalists, here are some names. Technological Jews, I might say. There are the white, the technological whites, and the technological Jews, basically. Yeah. Yeah, that's my vision of the Jewish. And I could have added Abraham, of course, in a way. Moses, Abraham, Jesus, Saint Paul, and the figures of the apostles. Most of them were Jews of the Bible, basically. So that's my current vision of the Jewish people, basically. Yeah. Okay, and now Germany, and I included Austria and Switzerland, namely countries whose native language is German, at least in parts of Switzerland and in Austria. So Germany, Austria, Switzerland. So here I do not really understand a lot about the German political and spiritual life in the present age, because I do not speak German very well. But here are two spiritual people. This is partly my view of Germany, namely a unity of opposites, intelligent people speaking to one another, accepting the flaws of the human conditions, while speaking German. So my vision of Germany, it's an African person in a wheelchair talking with prostitutes, Nazis, alcoholics of all sorts. But it's not just that, it's also the totality of German philosophers. But these people, Leibniz, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, Nietzsche, who help and enable understand this vision of Germany, which is not the only vision, but it's one vision, basically. So, yeah. Germany is a very complex country, but this is the view that I have. So, of course, the German newspapers, they are probably all on the left. Some YouTube channels which talk about German political life. Here are some German YouTubers who either teach German or speak German. German politicians, could have added Schröder, Helmut Kohl. Yeah, but these are the recent politicians. Some communists. He died a few years ago. These are modern. I think he's German. German communist thinkers. Movie directors. He directed Goodbye Lenin and Das Leben der Anderen, I think. Rammstein and Tokyo Hotel. These are rock bands. Here are YouTube channels which develop views about philosophy and or science. Here's I think she's of Asian origin. She makes great video about science. So there are non-anthropological Germans who are very intelligent, very spiritual, very intelligent. Here is members of the Alternative für Deutschland, so they oppose the political system, basically. These are right-wing Germans. Libertarians, Einer Rindermann, I'm not sure that he's a libertarian, but he's a proponent of bourgeois values, so he talks about sociobiology tied with economics, IQ, etc., etc. So he's a modern, interesting scientist. Hans Hermann Hoppe, who theorized libertarianism and private property, and who is a very consistent German thinker who speaks mostly in English. Thilo Sarrazin was, I think, a leftist who talked about the demographic situation and the decline of Germany, which qualifies him as a conservative, basically. He's a writer, he's a pagan who has a YouTube channel. So I don't know a lot about the modern life of Germany, but I know a lot about historical Germans. Astronomer, of course, who had an influence, direct or indirect, upon Newton. The writings of Hegel keep referring to Kepler, to praise Kepler against the how do you call this? The errors or the obscurities of Newton. The writings of Hegel are filled, the philosophical writings about the philosophy of nature are filled with criticism of Newton to rehabilitate Kepler, basically. Mathematician, quantum physicist, or the founding fathers of the quantum theory. I think, I don't want to say something stupid, I think he was I put him in there because I don't really know. I think he's a scientist, of course, but I could not give much more determinations. Goethe, of course, here I put him in scientist because he wrote about light and the life of plants. So he was a complete man. He was a great writer, a politician, and also a scientist. He was a total man in a way. Sociobiologist. These are the early decades of the 20th century. Carl Jung as a Swiss person of German language. Gutenberg, of course, who invented the printing press. These are National Socialist economists. These are libertarian economists from Austria. Well, Bismarck and Hitler. I could have added Friedrich the Great, etc., etc. Political philosophers. They have been tied more or less directly with the Nazis, basically. Carl Schmitt, Rosenberg, of course, and Spengler has been linked with the National Socialist indirectly, but he was not really a National Socialist. He wrote about the myth of the Grail. Schiller and Goethe are considered to be the classical writers in Germany. Hölderlin, Novalis, they are kind of pre-romantic. Novalis was a romantic. Pre-romantic, he was officially, says the story, in Tübingen with Schelling and Hegel. The Grimm brothers, and Ernst Jünger. Yeah. And here, of course, I am familiar with most of these names. Eckhart, Suso, this is German mysticism, German theology, German theology, philosophy, theosophy, German philosophy. Well, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel. These are the major names of German idealism, but there's also Schleiermacher, Jacobi, Herder, philosophy of history, Schopenhauer. Humboldt was about language, a critic of Christianity which influenced Marx. Nietzsche, of course. Frege was a logician, and I'm less familiar with the modern, except Heidegger, I'm less familiar with the modern end of 19th century, 20th century philosopher. And here are modern, contemporary German philosophers, theologians. Meister Eckhart, of course. Cusa, Thomas Münzer, who was a theological revolutionary in the Middle Ages, early Renaissance. Theosophist or esoteric thinker, theologian of the 18th century, Luther, of course, Karl Barth, who was a Swiss theologian, a great musician, and Leni Riefenstahl, the great movie director. So this is my view of Germany. But I will conclude by saying, in order to understand what's in the middle, one has to understand the spirit, the historical spirit of the folk, basically. This is what enables to understand political life. In a sense, that's why I do not know a lot about empirical Germany, as I call this, but about metaphysical Germany, I know a lot, basically. And metaphysical Germany is being reflected here and partly there, and even here, and there, and everywhere, basically. And not only in Germany, but metaphysical Germany is also being reflected here, and there, and there, and even there, basically. So that's what I could say about the life of the West. And I will just make a few modification. Yeah. So these people, I will just show these people in yellow. They are people in whom spirit is present as of now. So yeah, they are very spiritual. She's spiritual as well, and also she's spiritual in a sense, not really, but she has the spirit of cultural Hegelianism. So she's not on the left. They are not really spiritual, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are really spiritual Frenchmen and French women. In America, these people are spiritual. These people are very spiritual. In England, they are spiritual, although this person identifies as an atheist, but one doesn't need to identify as a Christian or as a religious person, whatever religious affiliations, in order to be spiritual, precisely because that's very Hegelian. So yeah, they are spiritually enlightened. These people are, I mean, he's not dead, but the other are dead, but they were more than spirit. They were spirit itself, basically. And in Germany, there are these two people. So yeah, that's what I could say about the spiritual life of the West. I will pause and I will just briefly comment so that the video. I will comment with the introductory picture about logic, basically. So yeah, this is what I said earlier, namely that the singular country that I know the most is France. Second, I would say the United States of America, but for all the reasons that I have explained, and hopefully that people, at least some people, will understand, in order to understand the universal, one has to understand the singular, and in order to understand singulars who are subsumed under other particularities, one has to understand one's own singular in a way. So I shared my view. It can be doubted. It can be questioned. It has to be questioned. That's the purpose, to be negated in a way. But at least this is the view that I have. Yeah. And yeah, I can only understand. As of now, I can only understand countries in which the language. in which the language is either I can only understand countries as of now in which the language is either French or English or German. But in order to understand a country like Senegal, I could they speak French mostly. But in order to understand Russia or Nicaragua or the Fiji or South Korea, one would have to study the most important historical, religious, intellectual figures of the country to understand some of its particularities, and then go into the singular aspect with the modern people inhabiting this country. So in a way, each person begins in one's own country. Even those who travel a lot, either they are refugees or their parents have the opportunity to travel from one country to the other, or they are failed states, but most people on the planet have a singular country of birth in which they grow up. Sometimes the conditions are very, very difficult and very harsh, but each person, I mean not each, but most people on this planet have a singular country with which they identify. There are, of course, like I said, the refugees, war refugees, economic refugees, there are immigrants, willing or unwilling, and there are those who travel because their parents are privileged and they go from one place to another and they speak several languages and have several cultures. But most people are still sedentary, in the sense that they grow up in a country and they grow old enough to adopt the culture of a country. Let us say that at the age of 15, if you have spent the first 15 years of your life in one country, you are not fully developed intellectually, but you know enough for the rest of your life to have a broad view of the history, culture, etc., etc. So the intellectual journey begins from the singular, and people who think, either they have the time, the opportunity, the capability to think, they elevate themselves to the thinking consideration of the particularity and eventually reach the universality. And once you have made the upward path, you have to go down to study other countries. Namely, once you have understood the process, you can go back down to study more thoroughly, and then you can deduce the life of every empirical country. So that would be induction and deduction, basically. But in order to understand the process, one has to understand at least one's own native country, in a way. And there are people who are people of many countries, binationals, people who either they are born in England, but they have a strong ties with, I don't know, with India or with Poland or whatever. So they feel that they have a double nationality, or sometimes even more, but whatever. But this is how it works. So I have given in another video my perspective on the singular life of France. I think I can understand in broad outline the US. And if I could spend many months, many years, I could study every English-speaking country. European, American, Southern, even African, I could understand, because I can read and understand English. And I could even, if I took many years, I could understand Germany very well, or Austria, or Swiss, because I would take the time to read. But I cannot spend many years studying each country, so I give my perspective. And my views, the way I envision, I will not show again, I have already showed this, but the way I envision the political, spiritual life can be adopted, and it has to be adopted, and negated, and confronted, and seriously questioned, maybe sometimes. But I think that this is the only method in order to understand a country. Namely, here I will just go back to the case of where is it? The case of France. So here's not the case of France. Here's the I understand most of the categories, most of the contradictions, most of the opposition, because I know broadly the history of this country, the language of this country, the institutions of this country. So I cannot, as an empirical individual, I cannot do the work I mean, it's not really work, it's just classification, but I cannot understand other countries the way I understand France, and only a native person, a native empirical person from the US, England, Scotland, Germany, and eventually from every country on earth can understand his or her own native empirical country by using, in Vietnam or in Cambodia or in Tajikistan or in Ghana, they wouldn't have the same categories, of course. In North Korea, well, of course, there are organic intellectuals, but I'm not sure that the opposition is tolerated, or so of course there are problematic countries in terms of the development of intellectual life, but at least in the countries, for now, who have a rather free intellectual life, the method, namely the systematic exposition of all the contradictions, that which I showed in the video about the French life, is the only method of knowledge. And here I can see, because I am empirically French, I can see the contradictions that I talked about in my other video about France. I can see the contradictions at all levels, and only a Native American, whether he's Anglo-Saxon or just white, or native of America, whether he's Afro-American, Hispanic, Asian, or native Indians, or any other anthropological determination, only a native cultural American, and by native cultural American I mean a native person of the US who has grown in the US and knows the culture broadly, and by culture I mean the determinations of thought in its broadest aspect. I want to say that high American culture would be some of these people, high American culture, but culture, here I could have added, of course, all the singers, all the movies, the TV shows, but that was not the purpose. I didn't spend a lot of time showing this, I just classified, but the intellectual life of the United States of America, only a Native American, a native cultural American, I repeat, someone who has grown and in America and who speaks, I would say speaks English. I'm well aware that America is a country where now they speak Spanish more and more, but a native English speaker who has grown in the US, gone through the educational system, read the newspapers or watch the media on the internet, can understand in a much more thorough and I will not make the joke about Henry David Thoreau again, in a more thorough way, the inner categories, the inner contradictions, the inner process, in the sense. So I cannot, I mean I could potentially, but actually I cannot spend 3 years, 5 years, 10 years studying the American life. So I share my knowledge, and I will let those who eventually watch this video and who are interested in the life of spirit and the life of God, if someone is interested, I will let them fill the categories, further divide, reclassify. There are many questionable decisions or choices. I did this as rigorously as I could, but given limited circumstances in terms of limited intellect, limited knowledge, limited time, I did what I could. Some decisions are very questionable, but at least I will conclude on this. I know that I will have to be judged for all my errors, all my sins, all my stupidity, all my wickedness, but I will conclude on a neutral remark in a history of European literature. And probably even maybe it exists also in China. I know that they have a novel in which a person travels westward and encounters foreigners, whatever, but it's prevalent throughout European literature. The story of a foreigner, whether he comes from a foreign country, like in Montesquieu it's a Persian visiting 18th century France, or from another planet. It exists in Cyrano, not the play of the 19th century, but the French author of the 17th century, namely people visit the moon and the inhabitants of the moon, or when the Americas were discovered by Europeans, there were stories written by European explorers to describe the ways of life of the natives. And the opposite in Montaigne was true as well, namely the natives looking at the French from the perspective of the primitive tribes and examining the French ways of life. And it has been a recurrent feature throughout European literature, namely the idea that one can only know oneself through the mediation of the look and the investigation and the reflection of another. So officially I am 30 years old. I have spent 9 years of my life reading books. Most of what I have come to know about America or England or Germany, so but mostly America, I have known since 2013 through my readings. Before that, I knew well broadly the movies and the sportsmen, but that was pretty much it. All the other view that I have acquired, it has been during the nine years, and especially during the past 6 years, since 2016. Before 2016, I knew about culture broadly, but it's only since 2016, so over the past 6 years, that I have come to know about politics, basically. So that's my view of American politics from the perspective of an empirical Frenchman with a metaphysical German mind, basically. That's what I could say, and yeah, that's what I had to share.